Well, hello everybody. How you doing? For the 5 people here for SOC, all right, it's good to go. Hey, my name's Paul Keener. I'm the field CISO of the Southwest for GuidePoint Security. This happens to be a passion project of mine. So as we go through this, feel free to, think about your questions, ask them. If you don't ask questions, I'm probably going to call on you, just so you know. So, all right. So I want to give credit to this next 2 slides to my friend Sean Wallace, who's right here, because this is, you don't really think about putting disclaimers up or agendas. You just kind of assume that everybody knows what you want to talk about. So disclaimer, the opinions are my own based on years of mistakes, and your mileage may vary as we go through this. All right, so what are the goals? I want you to walk away with a better understanding of why cyber threat intelligence actually matters in the SOC. It may seem intuitive for some of you, and you're like, hey, well, clearly cyber threat intel should be in the SOC. Well, I'll be honest with you, that is a minority view. So you have threat intel that's coming in, but not really integrated with the SOC. So who's this talk for? It's for everyone. Now it's built as this kind of an intermediate level, but the reality is that it's good for anybody that happens to work in security operations or is responsible for security operations teams. And I'm hoping that you're going to find, I'm hoping that you, and that's all of you, even the ones way, way in the back, cool kids in the back, right? That you guys find something valuable out of this particular presentation. All right. And away we go. I don't have any cool music. I wish I did. If I'd have thought about it, Sean, that'd have been great. So, and by the way, if you missed Sean's talk, you should go back and watch that. That was funny. All right. So who is this guy? So start at the bottom. I like to say it's not that you make mistakes, it's that you learn from them, right? So I was enlisted in the Army and then in the Navy as a CB. And then I went to the Marine Corps. Now, not that the Army or the Navy are mistakes, but if you're a Marine, you have to give grief to everybody that was in those branches. It's a requirement. After the Marine Corps, so I was in the Marine Corps. I ran the Marine Corps Red Team, built and ran the Marine Corps Red Team. I was a service lead for the development of the Cyber Mission Force. And at the last part, I developed Cyber Developmental Test and Evaluation Group doing nation-state attacks against command and control systems out of Camp Pendleton. When I left in 2017, when I retired after 27 long years, I went to Viasat to run their Red Team and build their SOC, their cyber operations. And then in 2020, 5 days before SolarWinds, I shifted to City National Bank as the head of cyber ops there. And now I'm at GuidePoint as of January of this last year. And I don't put a picture of myself up there because I got a face made for radio. So I don't want to offend anybody here, right? Okay. So what's the role of cyber threat intel in SOC operations? How would you describe it? Most people, when you talk to them about cyber threat intel, they think about Recorded Future. They think about, CrowdStrike, their threat intel, or Unit 42, or whoever. But if you think about it, all of them are external intel pieces pointing into your organization. There's nothing wrong with that. Threat intel, good threat intel feeds, there's nothing wrong with that. But the question is your threat intelligence, is it a news agency or is it a psychic, right? Are they just reporting what's happening day to day? Hey, by the way, some bad stuff happened, around the world. Okay, well, great. I have a philosophy generally that there's 3 questions I ask when it comes to threat intel. So what? Who cares? Why am I paying for it? Right? And so I want to know why it matters. Typically, threat intelligence is outside of operations. It's kind of this weird thing initially. It's like when you're a super small organization, threat intel is outside. Then you become a little more mature, and maybe you get somebody, like me who loves threat intel and loves operations and brings them all together. And then they merge for a bit. And then you get very big. And maturity is described as, putting things into what I call kind of cylinders of excellence, right? You break everything out. Everybody's got their own world, and you're requesting information and integration with the threat intel team. So the last question is like, should it be outside of ops? Anybody want to gander a guess as to what my opinion is on that one? No? Yes, I heard somebody. I appreciate it. Thank you, by the way. All right, so yes, the answer is no, it should not be outside of operations. And by the way, if you like the images, all of the images that I did on here are from ChatGPT. So I just, it makes it so you can't get yelled at by people with copyrights. So, all right. So how do you enhance threat detection? Well, I think with enhancing threat detection, there's a couple of ways to do that. So the purple team, everybody comes up with the colors. I remember when I first heard about purple team, I was like, that's really dumb. It's like, it's red team, it's blue team. It's like, how many colors are we going to come up with? Somebody, in the Marine Corps, somebody would have got a medal for that. But purple team as a practical application is extremely effective. Essentially, you would call that a cooperative assessment, right? So, and we'll get into some use cases here about the integration. And purple team is huge. It allows you to do advanced threat actor detection. So, a couple of things that I think are important. You're integrating IOCs. You're looking at threat actor models. You're getting someone like Sean, who's again, he and I worked together at a bank at one point, but really super good to bring in, somebody who does the threat modeling. The APTs everywhere. Now this part, I hesitated about putting this there, mainly because if you're not in the federal government, nobody really cares about APTs. They care about whether or not somebody is actually in your network, if they're operating. Yes, the patterns do matter, and the groups do matter, the attack groups. But as far as like tracking APTs, if you're not in the federal government and you're not in the intelligence community, it really doesn't matter quite as much. So I think that it's important to track patterns, to track threat actors in your architecture. You can't do that without threat intelligence integrated into operations, because threat intelligence by itself only has one part of the answer. All right. So AI. I read somewhere that you can't do a talk nowadays without mentioning AI. So I have mentioned AI. No, but there's when you look at threat intelligence and the use of AI, especially in vendor tools, there are some vendors who do it really well, and you can get synthesis of information a lot faster than you could if you were doing what I would consider traditional threat intelligence research. And the tool integration piece, probably the most important. So we're going to get into a couple of different points here about how threat intel is integrated in the SOC, but one of those obvious points is integrating tools into your security operations capability, not just, hey, I've got the recorded future feed on my web or my web interface, and I'm just kind of looking at URLs and things like that. That's not threat intelligence. All right, so there's a lot of ways to do this. We're going to talk about that here in just a second. Okay. So how do you streamline incident response? So there's a couple of things that happen initially. So when you're running security operations, at least the way that I did it, the first thing that you do, we have a daily stand up, and the first person to brief is threat intelligence. Right, so our cyber threat intel team. And the reason we do that is so everybody gets a level set about what's going on, kind of where things are coming, what the context is. So for example, if there's a new threat that's released, or new CVE that's released, or a new actor out there, it matters, how does it apply to us as an organization? The security operations team may be able to figure that out if they have everything reporting in and they've practiced that, but that's generally not the case. You need somebody who understands threat intelligence and can provide some context about what they're seeing on the wire. You get better alerting when you have threat intelligence integrated into the SOC, mainly because you're not just looking at noise, right? If you look here at the picture, and I'm trying to remember the prompt that I used. I think it was, show a complex system going to, something that's easy to see. And this was the best ChatGPT could come up with. So there's that. But the better alerting piece, when you're looking and you're talking with your threat intel team, your security operations people, your incident response are looking at, or your incident responders are looking at the SIM, they're looking at alerts, and they're trying to figure out, okay, what does this actually mean? Is it a false positive? Is it something that we need to respond to right away? Your threat intel piece can come in and say, okay, well, listen, especially in the financial services, for example, with FSISAC, they can go out and they can talk to other organizations within the financial services to find out if this is widespread, right? If other organizations in your industry are getting attacked. And for an incident responder, you can do that, but that's rare. You really need somebody focused on providing context to the attacks that are coming in. When you have integrated threat intelligence, and I feel like it seems a little obvious. I keep saying that, but it feels like it seems a little obvious that, integrated threat intelligence. I think if you walk down to the floor and you talk to all of the vendors and you ask them about threat intelligence, they'll all say that threat intelligence is integrated. What I'm talking about, and I just want to make sure this is clear, is not just the tooling. AI and the integration of automated threat intelligence is important. It's really important to have people who understand the threat intelligence process. So it's not just, you cannot just automate this out, in Paul Keener's perspective, hence the disclaimer. All right. So again, AI, your threat intel analysts, the ones that are trained, can leverage AI in a massive way, but it takes somebody who understands what they're looking at in order to make it make sense for the security operations team. All right, everybody with me so far? I don't have any candy, so I can't throw that out. That was something I was actually considering, but I'm glad I didn't. But all right. So I'm a huge fan of anime. I know it may not seem like it, but I love anime, and I couldn't put my favorite up there without, I think, getting flagged. So this is the Shonen Jump version of it, right? Okay, so I think probably the hardest thing that I've seen with threat intel is nobody in the business, nobody in the organizations that I've seen really understands why threat intelligence is important. They all have a kind of a tacit understanding of threat intelligence. Hey, we should do something with threat intelligence, but very few people see the return on investment. They don't see the business value of threat intelligence. And there's a couple of reasons for that. I think one is that threat intel, if you are a news anchor, right, and you're just reporting what's going on, nobody actually needs you. So you can get that automated. You don't need that. You can get that from Twitter. You can get that from other vendors. But in order to become proactive with threat intelligence, where you're looking and talking to the businesses and identifying, saying, hey, by the way, we're seeing this type of actor out there, and we think this is going to impact you. Providing some value to the businesses, listening to them. And so how do you test whether or not you're providing any value to the business? People start asking questions. They start giving you feedback on the threat intelligence that you're providing. They're asking for further clarification. That's how you know that you're providing some value to the organization, because people want to know more. What you're talking about is interesting. It creates a demand signal for cyber threat intel if you do it right. Now, it requires a pretty significant investment in relationships with the business units. So it can't just be threat intelligence for threat intelligence sake. At the end of the day, and there's probably some people here who are part of nonprofits, but for the rest of the world, right, it's not a charity. They're there to make business or to make money. And so threat intelligence should be doing a couple of different things. It should be providing context for the attack to identify whether or not your organization is susceptible to what's out there, and to be able to do that within about an hour. And they need to be looking proactively with the businesses to identify areas where they're vulnerable, where there's attacks. So an example of this would be like digital inside an organization, someone who's responsible for, our web front end. Well, they need to be looking and saying, hey, here's where we see some threats that are coming against, web interfaces. Here's where we think we're vulnerable. And then what that does is that stops that business unit from having downtime, maybe in a regulated environment, getting hit by the regulator, having to report it, right? So those things are super important. Any questions so far? No? All right. Just so you know, questions are demanded at the end. All right. So case studies. I didn't get permission to talk about particular organizations, so I had ChatGPT create a satellite company with lots of residential people and a bank focused on entertainment. So this is kind of what we did. All right. So there are two, and this is the reason why I wanted to do this talk, is because when you look at these case studies here, the similarities are really striking. Okay, so when I got to a satellite provider, and ironically, when I got to this bank, this is what the organization looked like. Everybody kind of by themselves, detection and response off doing their thing. They had, threat intel-ish kind of doing their thing. Everybody's off. We actually didn't have a forensics capability. At the bank, we didn't really have a sec DevOps capability, but at Viasat, a satellite vendor, we did, right? We did have a sec DevOps, right? And so what was my role? What did I do? My view is that people operate better when they're all together, when they're all under one umbrella. And it's not that you take away the autonomy of each organization. What you do is you provide a framework for people to work together. When you're the person running it and you're saying, okay, listen, red team, and this was the case with the satellite company, right? I originally came in to run the red team and build their capability and a commercial capability, but we did an attack against the SOC, and it didn't turn out well. Right? So unsurprisingly, there were some issues, and the SOC was like, who the hell do you guys think you are coming in here and hitting us, And I mean, it got super contentious. And so I went back to my boss and said, they all need to work for me because I'll just squash it all. You're all on one team. You're all here to help each other. The red team is not here to attack and make people look foolish. The purpose of a red team is to inform business risk. That's really what the red team does. And so if that's the understanding and you bring them all under one umbrella and there's one person who is the deconflictor of friction, well, then it makes things move much simpler, much faster. And when you put this into context at the bank, the same thing happened. Everybody kind of scattered all over the place. There was no cyber operations organization when I got to the bank. Pulled red team under, and I got a red team guy who is probably the very best red teamer. No offense, Sean. The very best red teamer that I have personally ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot of them. And we did a bunch of purple team. I think we did 23 purple team events within a year. And what happened, what we would brief, threat intel would start, and they'd say, hey, by the way, we had this one issue, and he goes, hey, by the way, we've got this issue with this particular technology, and I asked him, I said, his name's Fernando, he's a great guy. I was like, Fernando, do not break this. And he's from Spain, so he hadn't actually, he's like, oh, Soder, it's too late. Literally by the time the intel team had finished briefing, Fernando was already broken in. Now, why is that valuable? One, he understands the rules of the road. And so he wasn't crossing lines that I didn't ask him to cross. But second is that because he was quick, he was able to identify and validate that the exploit was real and that we were vulnerable to it. So it provided immediate context And it allowed us to immediately raise the flag and say, we have an issue, a very serious issue that needs to be addressed today. It was the first time, I think, in my career where we had an identified issue that day and it was fixed that day. That's how bad it was. But we wouldn't have known that if we didn't have somebody briefing it, if we wouldn't have had red team, an actual qualified, capable attacker who was able to execute the attack, to be able to show that, yes, this was actually true. And Fernando, my goodness, that guy is freaking amazing. But he would come in and he would be able to go through and conduct attacks. What was the purpose of his attack? This is the other piece here when we talk about the integration of threat intelligence. I'm going to show something here in just a second because I think it's important. Because I think the best practices piece, and again, best practices according to Paul. All right. So yes, I work for GuidePoint. I normally don't wear all the badging, but we have a booth down there, so I had to wear that. But this is my version of it. So this is what a SOC operating model should look like in Paul Keener's perspective. If you notice there, everything is talking back and forth to one another. Red team is talking back and forth, and everything is centered around the threat intel team. Threat intel, 90% of the time, is ancillary to everything else you do. We talk about bolt-on security. Intel is generally bolted on. That's because a couple of things. One, people don't understand it. Intel people suck at marketing themselves. They don't understand how to sell what their capabilities are and what value they bring. And nobody sees that value, right? So what happens with Fernando, for example, this is where threat intel comes into play. You've got an intelligence report coming in a daily stand-up that's briefed to the entire team so everybody understands what's going on. Fernando takes that and starts to execute. What's his purpose? Is his purpose to just break stuff? No, the purpose of red team, the purpose of purple teaming in a security operations capability is to validate security controls. That's really what it's there for. Can you detect what the threat is, or can you not? It's a binary question, right? And if you can't, what do you need to have in place in order to be able to do that, right? And so the threat intel team feeds the red team comes back, feeds threat intel, says, yes, this is valid, or, no, we're good. And then you have detection and response and everything feeding back to one another. So it's not just that threat intel owns the roost in security operations. That's not the case. Threat intelligence is the hub that everything rotates with, right? So good threat intel will make you move faster, not slower. All right. Any questions on this? Everybody get their pictures?
Yeah.
Oh, incident response task force. Yeah, thank you, by the way. The golden rule, don't put acronyms up there that you don't explain. But the incident response task force. So if something, for those that aren't aware of what that is, if that is when there is a breach response, or what we call a kind of a whole of business response required. So SolarWinds was a whole of business response. CrowdStrike would have been a whole of business response, although it wasn't really a cyber issue. But those types of things is where the incident response task force comes in. And again, threat intel is feeding the incident response task force context, which is important. Any other questions on this? Yes, ma'am. Can I explain adversary monitoring? Yes. So part of the functions of threat intelligence is identifying those threat actors, and not necessarily APTs, right? Advanced persistent threats, not exactly APTs, but those threat actors who are coming after us. So they could be transnational criminal organizations. Like if you're in a bank, you get fraudsters who are acting against you. You can get at the satellite company I worked at, right? We ran a residential community or residential service. We were able to see threats coming across the residential side before they would hit the government side, because threat actors go for the easy. They're testing things out, and you can literally see it coming across the residential side. And so by the time they got there, we're monitoring this capability. We're monitoring this, and we're going, okay, we need to be prepared for this. We can see it coming, right? And that's what I mean by adversary monitoring. Any other questions on this? When does an organization become big enough to have a cyber threat intel organization? That's a great question, man. So I think when you get big enough where you have a security operations function, you need to have a threat intel function. Right. So when you're a small to medium sized business and you're just scraping by with a couple of people, yeah, you're probably not going to have this. Like, this is the ideal kind of what you should be shooting for as you mature. And so this is primarily going to be when you are, I don't know, maybe 10 people as an organization. You need to have some dedicated capabilities or resources for threat intelligence. And as you get to very large organizations, you'll see that they'll start to break threat intelligence out completely. And it's like an engineering pool. So you're bidding for resources from that threat intel side. I think that tends to be very dangerous, because threat intel is designed to provide context, not only for the business, but also for the cyber response capabilities. And if you're bidding for those types of resources, there's delays, which create issues when you're trying to respond. Does that make sense? So what's the smallest threat intel? If you're just starting out, you're going to rely a lot on vendors, right? On threat intel feeds and you're going to rely on managed services, those types of things that have threat intelligence integrated into the platforms. And when you're small, that's enough, because you don't have it to do real threat intelligence. It takes a lot of time. And there's only two ways really to be trained in threat intelligence, which will explain why I'm saying what I'm saying, right? So you're either trained by the federal government in professional threat intelligence, or you have been working in that for your entire career. There's no, you don't really kind of happenstance into the threat intel world. There's usually a background there, one or the other. And so to get that level of threat intelligence, one, they're not cheap. And so most small to medium businesses will leverage managed services and the threat intelligence that comes with that. Does that make sense? Okay. And by the way, yes, sir. So intel source monitoring is monitoring the viability of the sources, and the threat intel monitoring, you're monitoring what it is, the kind of the context that you're getting. So it's not just, so you're looking there, it's a kind of fine distinction, admittedly, right? But where it breaks apart is you're looking at the sources, the novelty of those sources, what it looks like when you're getting that data, and then you're looking for the threat intel piece, like which communities are you belonging to, where you're getting the different sources, so that you're getting enough context, enough varied context that it makes sense. Does that answer that? Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? All right. I like this crowd. This is good. Thank you, by the way. I appreciate it. And by the way, if you want to ask more questions, just saying, there's an event at Top Golf later this evening. Cribble, I think, is sponsoring it. So come there and, I don't know, use their money, play golf. All right. All right. So with threat intel, with everything we're talking about, you have to have some recommended KPIs, right? You can't have a talk like this without KPIs. Again, huge fan of anime, so does not represent the one that I like, but that's okay. All right. So I broke it into kind of three categories. Normally it's strategic, operational, and tactical, but effectiveness is a little bit better, I think, for me. So on the strategic side, you're looking at your threat detection improvement rate. Are you improving over time? The CTI-driven incident response. This is, I think, probably it's linked to the bottom one that talks about the number of incidents identified or prevented through CTI. One of the key things that tells you whether or not threat intelligence is value added is how many incidents are created as a result of threat intelligence. And if you don't have any incidents being created by threat intelligence, your threat intelligence is ineffective. So there needs to be a percentage there. So how aligned you are with business objectives. The operational side, how long does it take to get the threat intelligence to the people that need it? The requirement that I had was when a exploit was released or something that was potentially impacting the bank, I needed to know whether or not we were vulnerable within an hour. And it took, I think, 90 days for the team to get to that level. So it's not easy. And I had 3 people doing that job. It's not easy to do that. And it requires another piece, which nobody likes to do, CMDB, right? So what assets do you have? You have to know that in order to be able to provide that answer. The threat intel consumption rate. So are people actually using what you're providing? Are you getting any questions back? Does anybody ask you anything? Or do you publish a threat intel report and it just goes into the ether? And if that's the case, you want to talk about demoralizing and feeling like nobody's listening to you. That'll happen. But that's what happens when you're just a news anchor. The false positive rate and the novelty percentage. This goes back to Intel source monitoring, right? When you're looking at the novelty rate, I think when I was at the satellite company, we had 84 different feeds coming in. And at some point, maybe, we'd have a couple that were only providing 1%, of value, which is ridiculous, right? And so you're looking to identify different, higher level of novelty from reputable sources. I must add there, right? So not just that somebody's providing a bunch of stuff that seems cool, but is it, if you have 5 sources and they're all reporting the same thing, do you really need all 5 sources? Right? What's the novelty rate for those sources? Like at the satellite company, we're at Broadband ISP, we can see we had better threat intelligence than most of the organizations we were feeding from. Right? And so the question was, how many different things were we seeing from those threat intel teams? All right. The reduction in adversary dwell time is important. Like how long are you allowing somebody to just sit in your architecture? This is a more difficult one to tie to threat intelligence, but it's important because the threat intel team will provide the IOCs and the indicators that will identify when that threat actor is present in your architecture. So how long did it take? How long did it take for you to detect? How long did it take for you to kick them out? How do you validate that they're gone? And the decrease in those mean time to detect and mean time to respond. Any questions on this? That is a great question. So, that's generally done through meetings with the business units and saying, okay, are we providing relevant threat intelligence that's helping you make decisions about your business? And so in the banking industry, one of the questions that you get asked by the regulator is the threat intelligence that you're providing getting to the business units, and are they using it to make decisions? That's actually a question that you get. And so, and I remember many exams, I'm like, I don't know. It's like they're not asking. They don't really care. We're just kind of fighting the fight day to day. But that's what that means. Like that, you're looking and saying, okay, are we helping you make decisions? How many decisions are you making about your business that are influenced by threat intelligence?
Give an example.
Sure. So for example, I'll go back to the web interface one. That's a good one, right? So one of the requirements in a regulated industry like finance is, if you're down for a certain amount of time and customers can't access their funds, that's a reportable incident to the OCC, right? The primary regulator for banks. And so if if we get intelligence that says, hey, by the way, there is an attack, there is a group that's attacking this, they're coming after banks, we're seeing it through FSISAC. Here's a decision we need to make about how we provision these web interface or these web resources, right? So maybe we need to make a change. Maybe we're going to instead of waiting for the next month to make the change, we're going to do it now, because that's going to stop us from downtime. It's going to stop us from having a report or having a reportable incident to the OCC, right? So that would be an example of where threat intel would drive that decision. It's not a sexy one, admittedly, but it's an important one, right? Unless you don't want to get yelled at by the OCC. Any other questions on this? Okay, all right. So KPIs are just as boring here as they are when you're at work. All right. Okay, so I will tell you that this was the hardest image to generate. I just want to tell you this because I said what I really wanted to show was two rowing teams, one blue, one red, with blue clearly ahead of red. And so after 17 iterations, what I got back from ChatGPT was, here's your image where blue is clearly ahead of red. And I'm like, I don't know what clearly ahead means to you, but this is not it. But this is a good example of red and blue, kind of running at each other, where red obviously being the adversary here. So how do you stay ahead of adversaries? One, and this is important, threat modeling generally is going to be, it's going to be linked with threat intel, not necessarily under the same house, right? So at the bank, my buddy ran threat modeling. I had the threat intel team, and my team was working with him. He was working with our team, providing threat models for what threat actors might be doing against our organization and where the risks were, right? That allows the threat intel team to focus their efforts, right? So you can, if you do it wrong, you can go so far and so wide with threat intelligence that it just simply becomes a useless waste of time. Purple team. I cannot express enough how effective purple teaming is. But it has to be with the right red team. It has to be with the right attacker. Somebody who understands the rules of the road, who doesn't violate, who can essentially operate almost autonomously, and who is a white hat. Like, that's the person that you need. Those are rare, quite honestly. But if you find one like I did, holy cow, it is a force multiplier like you will not believe. Threat hunting is super important. Everybody talks about threat hunting. Again, what do all these things have in common? They inform risk, right? They inform business risk. Threat hunting, if you do it right, threat hunting essentially provides a sonar sweep across your enterprise. And so, you can go down there the way that I like to describe it for those that aren't familiar. As you're at home and you hear something banging against the window, so you go downstairs and you see, oh, well, it's a tree. So you go out there and because you're going to take care of business right then and there, you take care of the tree and no more noise on the window. And that's a pen test, right? Or just kind of a spot point, right? You're fixing that one particular issue. Or alternatively, with the threat hunting piece, you go, now that you've identified that, you start looking across the entirety of your enterprise, meaning you're walking around your entire floor, the bottom floor, to see if there's any other indicators that a tree is about to hit your window, right? And preventing it before it starts to become a problem. So threat hunting, incredibly important, tied directly with Purple Team. Again, Purple Team, threat modeling, threat hunting, all of these things they're integrated, super tight family. All right, and obviously the intel feeds, good intel feeds. So what does that mean? That means you have to be a little creative. A lot of organizations talk about, hey, well, we're tied in with, and nothing against the FBI or CISA or anything like that. Okay. But if you're, for example, if you're in a financial organization, a bank, FSISAC is the premier intelligence solution for the civilian world. There is nobody better. the ISACs that people are a part of, those provide a lot of good intelligence, whether it's FSISAC or the aviation ISAC. Pick your industry vertical. Those are super important. Just keep in mind that when you're getting stuff through InfraGard or you're getting stuff through CISA, things like that, those are unclassified reports, and you're not going to get the super detailed information. It's probably stuff you can get somewhere else, quite honestly, but it's not bad. It's you at least know that it's coming from a reputable source. Any questions here? No? Anybody InfraGard leader who wants to box later, right? No? All right. Okay, so how do you build a CTI-centric SOC? One, it has to be a priority. You have to hire people who are good intel people. Now, what does this mean? You need to understand threat intelligence. You need to understand how threat intel is, or how good threat intel operators work. Now, here's the other piece right there. Within the government, there are 17 different intelligence agencies, multiple different intelligence MOSs between SIGINT and or signals intelligence and imagery and intel. I mean, all these different things. Not all intel analysts are the same. When you're looking at threat intelligence for cyber, you're looking for somebody that has been involved with signals intelligence. Sometimes all source intelligence analysts are good, but you're finding somebody who has worked with, maybe DIA or NSA, those types of organizations who have experience in specific cyber threat intelligence. Very, very important. Now, should you exclude everybody else? No. You have to have a conversation with the person who you want to hire. It is important to talk with them about what their philosophy for intelligence is, how they generate reports, why they generate the reports, what they think intelligence is supposed to do. Very, very important. You have to invest in training tools and people. I just tell you right now, threat intel, what happens normally in organizations is they get one good threat intel person and they wear that guy out like a rented mule. Beating them down. No training whatsoever. They limited resources, and they're expecting them to provide high quality, threat intelligence reports that take teams to build. Right. So super important to make sure that you're investing in training tools and people, and your intel people have to be a part of a community. So that means that they need to be part of the ISACs that your industry vertical is a part of. That is very, very important. Intel analysts operating in isolation are not good intel analysts. Intel analysts and intel teams work best together. They work best when they work together. Sir?
It does say work like CTI America.
Horrible at it, actually.
Yeah, not far. You need to drink. Yeah, not good. No.
So one is writing a good job description, right, that clearly outlines what you're looking for, for somebody. And one is having the ability to ask questions that go beneath the resume, right? So you'll get some people who, and I had this happen, fantastic resume, incredible resume, not the right guy. And found that out pretty quick. And another guy who had been out of the game for, I think for a couple of years, but was an incredible intel analyst, right? But those you only know that through conversation, maybe giving them, asking them an example of how they approach threat intelligence. Because the reality is that most of the intel analysts are working in classified organizations, and so they don't really know what they can say and what they can't say. Right? My red team guy at the satellite company I had, he had probably the worst resume I've ever seen. But he had 3 letters on there that were super important. They said TAO. And Tailored Access Operations is NSA's offensive capability for the country. Somebody has done that. I told my boss, we're hiring that guy. I don't care about the rest of it. So one is knowing what you're looking for, having that experience to understand that, and 2, being able to draw that out of people, right? That's we're not going to fix their inability to market themselves, but we can help them, kind of explain why maybe they suck at marketing, but they're incredible, right? So does that make sense? Okay. All right. We're here. We've climbed, and we're at the conclusion. So I was really impressed with this image, by the way. I did not think that the ChatGPT would come up with this, but I was super impressed. Okay, so I think it talks about being integrated into ops is critical. I think it's essential. I think if you don't integrate Intel into ops, and Intel is a primary focus where intelligence drives operations, not the other way around. And I had this conversation with one of my Intel guys, and gave me this dog watching color TV look, like, what? I was like, yeah, dude, Intel drives operations. Now, why do you have a problem with that? Why is this? How does that impact us? Well, what it does is most Intel analysts will not want to make a definitive statement about anything. They'll want to say, well, it could happen. Some people say this. It looks like this might occur. I'm like, dude, just tell me. What's the likelihood? What's your confidence rating? Anything, help us drive it. If you can get somebody that understands that their job is to help drive operations, to help the operations team make decisions and move quicker, that person is a gold mine. AI can be a force multiplier. It's not a problem solver, right? It's an accelerator for good intelligence. It is not the solution to bad organizations, to be honest with you. All right, and good intel people are worth the money. Bad intel people, you just need to get rid of them as quickly as you can. But good intel people, you're going to have to pay them a lot of money, and they will the return on investment will be huge. You cannot be proactive without intelligence driving operations. It's just not possible. At the most, you're playing a guessing game. And if you're just doing detection and response, it's proactive. It is reactive. So you have to have good threat intel or good threat modeling, those types of things, to be proactive as an organization. All right. If you want to connect with me, again, I just want to, for the record, I'm not in sales, so I'm not going to sell you anything. If you want to talk to me about security operations, this is a passion of mine. It's what I'm an expert in. I've built multiple SOCs, and I've been doing this for a very long time. But if you want to talk, if you want to chat, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you want to chat tonight, again, I'm going to Top Golf because the best kind of golf is golf you don't pay for. So I want to do that. If you want to go there, just I think, like I said, Cribble's sponsoring that. So come out there and drink something or do some stuff on their dime. Any questions, concerns, challenges?
Yep.
Oh, my. No, I only, for some reason, I know, Sean. So we used to my wife gave me a dad joke of the day calendar, and I blamed my mother-in-law for a very long time until I realized it was my wife that gave it to me. And so I would inflict the dad joke of the day on my team. I just can't remember any of it right now. I'm sorry. So you're welcome, by the way. All right. That's all I have. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free. All right. Thanks.